would you begin? Heather is working on a PhD in the area of education and spirituality of children. So I asked Heather to begin us by sharing a little bit about what she's learning about the spirituality of children. So Heather, take it away.
Well, it is great to be here. I always appreciate conversations around children's ministry and appreciate opportunities to share kind of what I'm learning and talk about that with other people. My work as a children's ministry director is always evolving. So today, basically, you'll get a glimpse of where I am right now. And I invite you, as I kind of talk through some of the things that have impacted me, invite you to think about what that means for you as you look at children in the church. And I realize one of the greatest kind of changes that I've seen in my work is the lens through which I view children has significantly changed. So I invite you, as we're talking through this part, but also through other parts, to think about your own lens and how you view children and how that impacts what you do with them in the church. So, this morning, I'm going to, we're going to talk over kind of a brief conversation around what spirituality is, and then what other voices, what researchers have been saying about children's spirituality in the last 20, 30 years, and then how that has impacted my own ministry with children. So, one of the most difficult things with particularly research around the area of spirituality is that there is no one clear definition. It's a hard construct to define. So I just gathered a few of the definitions that spoke to me or that I have worked through a little bit. So the first one is from Walter. I realized I don't know how to say his name. I've been reading and writing a lot about him, but he says, spirituality is striving for an ever more intense union with faith through Jesus Christ by living in the Spirit. Alistair McGrath writes, spirituality is the quest for a fulfilled and authentic Christian experience. And Thomas Groom, who is he works at Boston University and is a Catholic Christian educator, writes, spirituality is our conscious attending to God's loving initiative and presence in our life, and to the movement of God's Spirit to commit ourselves to wholeness for ourselves and for all humankind by living in right relationship with God, ourselves, and others in every dimension and activity of our lives. I'm just going to give you a second to put that in. There's a lot there. What I like about Thomas, this definition in relation to the others, is that it acknowledges that God takes initiative, and that it's part of Him reaching out to us and our response to that. And so I'll end with one of my favorites when we're talking about children's spirituality from Rebecca and I. She says, children's spirituality is God's way of being with children and children's way of being with God. So that kind of drives my vision of what children's spirituality is. So in order to talk about theories of children's spirituality, I wanted to start with what are kind of the assumptions or theories that drive a lot of what children's ministry is based around, as a kind of to look at it counter to what it means to look at children as spiritual beings and how they are different, or in some cases the same. So the first is the idea of tabula rasa, or a blank slate, and this came from, it's attributed to John Locke, though that's debatable, from the basically Enlightenment period, and it's this idea that children are blank slates, so our job is to fill them up with what they need to know to grow. So it's all based on experience. There's no kind of innate ability in them. And while this has been refuted, really, I think if we think about a lot of what we do with children and the way we relate to them in the church, it can feel like we see them as blank slates, that their faith is blank, and our job is to fill them up with knowledge to develop that faith. So that goes into the banking method, which is this idea that, the same kind of idea, the more knowledge we fill children up with, the greater their faith will be. And the third one are the developmental theories. So Piaget and Fowler, but so many more, Kohlberg and Erickson, their work has driven a lot of what we do in children's ministry. If you look at curriculum, Fowler's often, for sure, the one that is quoted, but and a lot of books on children's ministry. And while there's nothing wrong with this, a lot of the researchers in children's spirituality are seeing some of the holes that a primary focus on developmental theories has in kind of not giving us a sense of children as spiritual beings and what they can offer to the learning and growth of the community. So some say that the reliance on kind of the stage theory erodes religion into reason, and then children's spirituality or religion or faith is seen as immature, not as worthy or inadequate. It also they also say that we're assuming that young children's cognitive limitations and immaturity is limiting their kind of faith and ability to experience God or be with God. So I don't think we need to get rid of the whole focus on developmental theories. It has offered a lot to what we do with children, but to say that that's the only picture of who they are, I think we're missing out on some of that. So I'm going to go through some of the three of kind of the biggest research projects with children and spirituality. I'm sure most of you have heard about these, but I'm just going to touch on them. So Robert Coles, he basically wrote one of the seminal pieces on children's spirituality called The Spiritual Life of Children. And basically in this book he gives us intricate yes, thank you, stories. He gives us this picture of children as really innately spiritual and innately having this kind of spiritual, sacred side of life. And basically he had done several years of research with children in a variety of settings, and he realized, as him and his wife kind of looked back through transcripts of interviews that he'd done, that there was this theme of religion and spirituality that came out of the children without even that being the focus of the interviews. So he wanted to learn more about that. So it's a beautiful book because he calls it my story of the stories they kindly gave me. So his goal isn't, he writes that his goal isn't, he didn't go in there with kind of this idea, I'm going to generalize children's spirituality and develop these theories around it, but he just wanted to share kind of what he had learned. And he did this research with about 500 children mainly from 6 years old to 13 years old. And he would spend up to 2 years with some of the kids, meeting once a week, every other week, just in conversation with them. And through that book, you get a picture of several things about children's spirituality. He calls them spiritual beings that are on a pilgrimage, just like we all are. But we also hear the children wrestle, and we hear them doubt the things that they're told by whether it's Sunday school teachers, pastors, but he talks to children from a variety of religious backgrounds. So the wrestling that they go through, but also their ability to kind of hold in tension the mystery of God, and their ability not to always need an answer to why things are the way they are. So following Robert Coles, we have David Hay and Rebecca Nye. And they did qualitative research with 38 6 through 11-year-olds from state schools in England, and they did interviews with these 38 children. And they found that 70% of the children, 70% of the 38 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 children, 70% of what they came out with from these interviews is what Rebecca Nye calls relational consciousness. And she describes children's spirituality as relational consciousness. So in the consciousness term, what she's saying is the children have a level of awareness of oneself and a level of awareness of the sacred quality of life. The relational aspect of their spirituality is that they have a affinity towards relationship with themselves, with one another, and with God that is really central, or God or a transcendent being that is central to their being, to their consciousness. And through their writings, they just talk about continued experiences with children as innate spiritual beings. So this is a part of who they are, and it's an integral part to every part of their being. So unlike some of us that feel, it can sometimes feel like church is our spiritual time of the day, and we have other aspects of life where that doesn't always speak into. But with children, it's just an overarching part of who they are. So the last one I'm going to talk about is Brendan Hyde, and he did work with 8 and 10-year-olds in Catholic primary schools in Australia, and he comes up with four themes that he sensed, or that he found in these interviews with children. And he describes their spirituality in these themes as a felt sense, an integrating awareness, they're weaving threads of meaning, so it's kind of woven in their life as they're making meaning of things that they're learning, and spiritual questing. So he just found this desire to search, and this constant searching and wrestling with spiritual stuff. And he said it's basically an essential human trait, spirituality is. Whether you're religious or not, it's a part of who we are. He identified 2 things that inhibit spirituality, and that was material pursuit, so a drive to have material possessions, and also trivializing. And he describes trivializing by experiences where he would see children kind of start to share about their spirituality, but then quickly trivialize it in a way to make it seem like it's not a big deal. And he saw that as a fear of their possibly questions, but also their kind of vulnerability, and realizing that this is a deep part of who I am, and to share this without it being welcomed can be hurtful. So he saw a lot of the trivializing. So those are just 3 of kind of the bigger research studies on children's spirituality. So I wanted to go into Rebecca Nye. She describes children's spirituality as being like children, and I love just these things that she brings to it. So it seems like babble sometimes, in that we don't always understand it. They don't always have the language that we have to describe what they're feeling and experiencing, and so at times for adults it can seem like babble. It's non-conforming in that it doesn't always fit into the box that we want it to fit in, so it's not always saying the right thing at the right time that we think they should say to identify that they have the right relationship with God. As I talked about before, it isn't compartmentalized, so it isn't like Sunday morning, here's my spiritual time, I go to school, and I forget about it, but it evades every part of their lives. It can be intense at one moment and then kind of nonchalant at the next. So I heard one woman, Mary Hayes, who works in England. I just recently heard a podcast from her, and she was talking about a thing they do there, and I don't know if this is as big of a thing here, but a show and tell. So children will leave worship and go do Sunday school, and then they'll be invited back to worship at the end of Sunday school to share something that they learned. And so what she just kind of related this idea that children, a 5-year-old doesn't kind of have this profound, amazing thing to say in Sunday school and then think, oh, I have to remember this because the adults are going to ask me and I want to look, show them my spirituality. So it's really, it's there, but it doesn't always come out when we would like it to come out. this kind of goes into the trivializing that Brendan Hyde talked about, but it matters deeply to them, but children don't feel like it always matters to other people, their spirituality. And lastly, it is vulnerable. She says that if neglected, ignored, or misunderstood, their spirituality will die, is the way that Rebecca and I describes it. And I think there's a lot of, that has been a powerful statement to me, because I think the church can be a place where we ignore or push aside children's spirituality sometimes too. So, all of these things and many more have been a part of kind of shifting my lens in what the experience with children is in church. A lot of it means for me looking beyond kind of the curriculum and the focus on knowledge development, to providing them spaces to wonder, to contemplate, to doubt, to question, and really to learn from children and what they have to offer. I wanted to give you an example of one of the things I do. Let's see. We'll do it because I have a couple minutes left. So I'm going to do this exercise. It's kind of a Lectio Divina type thing that I do with children during children's sermons sometimes. And so I'm going to invite you. I'm going to read from Psalm 121. I'll just do it 2 times, and I'll invite you to think about something as you hear the verse, and then I'll invite you to share if you want to. So for the first time, I want you to think about a word or phrase that sticks out to you as you hear these words. Psalm 121, 1 through 4. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. Does anyone have a word or phrase?
He who watches over you.
Mm.
We recently moved here from Florida.
Oh, yes.
There were a lot of kids that had never seen the mountain.
Yeah.
And I think something that's important to think about is, do kids have context
Yeah.
for what we say?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I'll read it one more time, and this time think of a color that this makes me think of. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep.
Green
Green.
and yellow.
And
Purple. He will not let your foot slip is the word, the phrase that
Yeah.
came for me.
Yeah.
And this time, as I listened to the beginning, I thought of green when I thought of the mountain. And then as soon as I heard you say, he will not let your foot slip, I thought of blue and just this like ocean, this very serene, relaxing, calming color.
Yeah. Any other
Picture of the sky.
colors?
You lift up your eyes, and so blue and white and clear.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Normally I'll read it a third time and just invite the children and adults to think about how it makes them feel. And I usually don't ask the children to share because adults will often laugh at their answers, and so I don't want that to be something when they're sharing a deep felt feeling to be laughed at. But what has been so powerful to me as I do these kind of things sporadically during children's messages is that the color gold often comes up with children, and it's interesting to me because, first of all, gold is not a color that when you're talking to children about their favorite colors, I don't often hear them say gold, but every time I've done something like this, the color gold comes up. And adults will often come up to me and say, I thought it was fascinating. I particularly remember this one because they all said, I thought of blue or I thought of green. And the children's colors mainly were gold, some yellow. But I just think it's an interesting exercise for us to think about how we view even scripture differently. And when children are allowed to kind of contemplate on their own, what we can glean from their experience with God through that.
Have you ever asked them what is gold in their minds? You know, like what do they think of? Are they thinking of streets paved with gold in heaven, or are they thinking of treasure?
I don't really ask in that situation. I mean, the whole goal is that it's their own kind of wrestling and contemplative reading. But yeah, it would be interesting to know. It's why not? Yeah. So I'll leave you with one more story, and this is from Christmas Eve. We were gathered up on the chancel. The kids were wondering about Isaiah, the idea that people walk in darkness. And so I asked this question, what does it look like to walk in darkness? And we had a lot of great answers from the kids, just talking about, you can't see, you don't know what's in front of you. And then a little 3-year-old, Violet, who was one of those girls that kind of hid behind her mom every time, you would go to say hi, or she didn't talk in Sunday school very often, but in front of this, on Christmas Eve, it's a huge crowd, she raises her hand and kind of mumbles something, and I couldn't hear her, so I kind of go back and forth, trying to figure out what she was saying. And what I hear, what we finally came to find out is what she was saying is, it's the place where my heart hurts. And this girl had lost her grandpa 3 weeks before, and I was almost literally brought to tears, and I'm almost brought to tears when I talk about it, because to me, I truly believe that what all of us got to experience that night was God connecting with her in that moment. And all too often, I think we don't give kids the opportunity and the space to have moments like that. And when we do, we are privileged as adults to see that God works in our lives in